Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
3, 2, 1.
654.
We're not doing a pop song here. We're doing a podcast. Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Calvert alongside my good friend, Father Joe Grimaldi. I've been thinking about this. As a matter of fact, I apologize for stopping right at the very beginning. Maybe it's time to change up the beginning. Do you think that? Or
whatever you think might work.
Maybe it's the comfort zone for people. You know, they're hearing my dulcet tones and
that's right,
in your beautiful New York accent,
nasal and everything else.
I always thought that Father Joe sounded like Tony Curtis, and people said, "You do Father Joe better than he does," and I went, "Not even close." I said, "I do Tony Curtis," and tell people that it's Father Joe Grimaldi. I would always say, "You know, Ken, God's a really good guy." So that's my impersonation of you.
I'll have to remember that. I'll try to talk that way.
How did you like that?
I liked it.
We're going to talk today about you spent, I exaggerate when I'm outside the ropes and I'm talking to people about the podcast. I thought you were in Rome for 4 years. You corrected me immediately and said, no, it was 3. But that's a long time, 3 years in Rome.
It was exciting.
So
I loved every bit of it.
To Rome with Love.
Okay.
Narrated by, and you'll hear the slide machine starting up in the background. So you were in Rome in what year?
In the late 1900s.
Okay. You mean like 97, 98, 99?
Yeah, I finished in 98.
Okay.
So, yeah, I finished in 98.
All right. And how was it that, as a priest, did you get some sort of an order, a mandate, if you will, to...
Yeah, I could explain why.
Yeah.
I was doing my studies, first of all, in 1986. I went to Catholic University of America in D.C. And
I'm going to stop you for a second. Do most priests study at Catholic University?
No, but some do. There are seminaries throughout the whole United States.
Right, okay.
For example, here in Detroit, we have Sacred Heart Seminary.
Of course.
However, people might go there for other degrees and so on. I had just finished my term at Brother Rice, and so they sent me to study in Washington, D.C. at Catholic University. At the end of my 3rd year, my bishop, who was in Honolulu, said to me, "Joe, would you mind doing your last year of studies in Rome, my 4th year? You could go to the Greg, which is the university the Jesuit university in Rome." I said I'd go in a heartbeat. I mean, could you imagine?
Yeah.
Particularly since I had to tell the bishop I am almost finished with my degree, so I'm going to have a lot of free time. And so he says, go ahead and finish it up over there. So I did. I did the 1 year at the Greg. And then...
why is it called the Greg?
The Gregorian University.
All right.
And then, obviously, I was ordained in 1990, and I was a pastor for only 5 years, and then the bishop, a new bishop, came up to me and said, you have to go back to Rome to do Canon Law. So I went to do Canon Law at the Angelicum, which is the Pontifical University of St. Thomas. In any case, I was there for 2 years, so the 1 year before and then the 2 years doing my Canon Law degree. It was exciting, the whole idea of being in this beautiful city, the eternal city. I call it the city that never sleeps. I mean, it might be dirty and grimy and so on and so forth, but it is certainly a city that's alive and is filled with people who are alive. While there, you could easily become jaded, when people say, oh, I spent a week in Rome. Well, a week. What can you see in a week? Because one of the things that always surprised me and baffled me, no matter how many times I did it, when I walked out of the Casa Santa Maria, which is where I lived, which is also called a Collegio Americano, which is the American college. It's not a college. The word college is a gathering place. That's what it means. It does not have anything to do with studies. It's a place where you do gather for your studies, but it's not a university as such. So people that live at the Casa Santa Maria are priests who are studying at different universities. They could be at the University of St. Thomas. They could be at the Gregorian. They could be at the Biblicum. But one of the things is you step outside the steps of Casa Santa Maria, you turn to your left, and there's this ornate building that's designed and decorated by Michelangelo.
Oh.
Right on the street there.
Oh,
I mean,
boy. Yeah.
And then if you walk the other way, and there's a church, Santa Maria, I believe it is. But anyway, there are two churches that face each other. But basically, as you go inside, you have all these magnificent Caravaggio paintings. We're everywhere. But anyway, what fascinates me is the fact that you have such beautiful works of art worth millions, and yet they're just open to the people, to the public. People could come and look at them whenever they want. There are certain restrictions as time goes on. They start putting restrictions on how far away you have to stand from the work of art to view it, but at least it's there. It's there for the public to enjoy, to see, to meditate on, and so on. As I mentioned, the various works of art that you find in all of the churches of Rome. And there are many, many churches in Rome, whether it's the Piazza Navona, which is almost like a football field, if you want, but it's surrounded by these magnificent works of art and architecture. You have a lot of the works of Bernini that are just there for the public to enjoy. Which brings me to another point, which is the largest church in the world, supposedly, and that is the Basilica of St. Peter. Now, St. Peter's Basilica is not a cathedral. It's not where the seat of the pastor is. That would be St. John Lateran. That's where you have the Pope's seat, or cathedra is there. But it is a basilica all the same, because it is the largest of the churches. It's one that's dedicated to St. Peter. And what's also fascinating about it is that there's an interesting museum that's part of it. First of all, there's an art museum related to it. The Vatican Museum of Art is fascinating. But there's a museum that shows the excavations of the work that was started by Pope Pius XII to investigate what was underneath the basilica itself.
What year was that?
That was around 1940, 39 and 40.
All right.
But it's interesting to me.
Why hadn't anybody else done it earlier, I wonder? But, well,
you know how things evolve. They don't necessarily
absolutely.
happen
Okay.
as when you look back on history, you have the advantage of saying why. But by the same token, as you're living life, you don't necessarily see what has to be done. What happened is Pius XII thought that there was supposed to be some renovations to the basilica. And so while they were doing those renovations, they discovered that there was a catacomb type situation underneath the whole basilica. And that's where they found some relics, if you want, that later were investigated, with the results being most likely the bones of St. Peter. They could even estimate how tall the man was, about how old he was, and all of that relates very well and coincides very well with history. And so they say that that's a real situation. Although Pius XII was interesting, he did not necessarily think that those were really the bones or the remains of St. Peter. It wasn't until later, and I'm going to say in the 60s, when Pope Paul VI finally had done studies, had employed people to do serious studies of the relics and the area where they were founded, to determine that they were most likely the remains of St. Peter.
Really?
So, yes, and that's most likely, I say, most likely.
Most likely.
Because there's always a little bit of
course.
Is it And, of course, skeptics are never going to believe it anyway,
Right.
but by the same token. So if you look at the architecture of...
Isn't that fascinating, though?
Oh, it is. It is absolutely.
That it's like, wait a minute. Let's find out what's going
really
on
they are.
under here.
Yeah. Well, here's what happened.
But it had to start with an idea of him saying, let's go into this area down here and see what we have.
Well, because there were cracks and whatnot in the
Crevasses.
structure that they
Yeah.
saw.
Yeah.
You see, in the year 300, Constantine, around the year 300, Constantine turned himself to become a Christian. And so he certainly stopped the persecutions against Christians. And then he wanted to build, because there were already around that time, people knew that Peter had to be. He was executed very close to that particular area. And there were certain burial grounds, if you want to call them. Actually, in Rome, they called it Necropolis, which is the burial ground for people, and particularly he discovered the area where the apostles probably were also buried, not just Peter. So what Constantine then had done, he wanted to build a basilica in honor of Saint Peter, and so he had the basilica built right above the necropolis, which was the area where...
Wow.
So this was as early as the year 300. But also, it's interesting because while they were doing that, they discovered more bones of people that maybe felt that Peter was buried there, and therefore they wanted to be buried next to Peter. So it was interesting because they saw him as a very holy man, as the leader of this church. So when they built the Constantine's structure, let's move on now to about the year 1500, around there. That is when they decided to build the present Basilica of St. Peter, which is now noted as the largest church in Christendom throughout the world. And so basically the work that they had to do with excavations and so on and so forth, the church, the original church, of course, was inadequate, and I'm not sure, but I think it may have even burnt, somehow was destroyed. But basically they built this big basilica over the area where the original church was, because again, pointing to the idea that those was where the remains of
basically sacred ground, as sacred as it could be.
Yeah. So there were three levels to look at when you look at the basilica. First of all, there's the level that's called the Vatican Necropolis, the Vatican burial area, which is the lowest of the levels, okay? Then there's a level above that, and that's called the Papal Grottos. That's where you'll find a lot of the popes buried over there. And then there's a chapel there as well. And then above that is the present basilica. So if you were to look at the Bernini altar, which is spectacular, the 4 Bernini columns that are over the altar, if you were to look at that and point some sort of a plumb line going right straight down, it all points to the area which was always noted as the burial spot for Peter.
Wow.
And so the altar in the middle, the altar of the middle area, of course the area by the necropolis, and then the present basilica. So that to me is fascinating.
Of course.
Not to be confused.
All right.
Not to be confused with the chair of St. Peter. And I think that's another thing that's sometimes people...
Which we have talked about before, because it's not at the basilica, right?
No, it is at the basilica, but it's not on the main altar.
It's not on the main altar.
It's a separate altar, yeah. And it's... St. Peter probably never sat in that chair, but it has symbolic value,
right,
because it is the cathedra. The cathedra is always the seat of the leader of the church. And so very often when we speak about dogmas in the church, we speak about the Holy Father speaking ex cathedra, which means from the chair. It doesn't mean that he sat there, but symbolically, that's where the authority of the Pope comes from, if you want, the chair of the Pope. That's why the cathedral is called the cathedral, because that's where the cathedra is.
I'm going to stop you for a second. I don't understand, why did they smash the ring of the Pope? Why don't they save that and consider that a relic? I know that it's probably now become part of history or whatever. Why would they destroy the ring, Joe?
Well, it's because the ring is where the Pope's insignia is.
Yeah.
And they don't want it ever to be duplicated.
Is it different for each?
Oh, yeah. Each one has its own.
Oh, really? Do they have any say in the design?
I'm sure they do.
Okay.
But, the insignia is solely that Pope's insignia.
Uh-huh.
And so they're afraid that somebody might use it as a stamp or something of that sort on certain documents and say that it came from that particular Pope, and it didn't. So it's almost like a seal. It's almost like a seal.
It makes me sad that they would destroy it.
I don't think they destroy it, but they certainly destroy the symbol.
Okay. Well, that still makes me a little.
Yeah,
I would give my kingdom on a visit to see the various rings of the various.
It would be interesting.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? What about their garments? What about their slippers? What about any artifacts from the various popes? Are those available for people to see if they were to make that visit to Rome?
Yes, I mean, in the papal museums, there's always examples of what the different popes may have worn.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting because we have a pope now who's done away with as much as possible all of the fanfare that goes along with being a pope.
Right.
He wears black shoes. He doesn't wear red slippers, okay, which is interesting.
Isn't that the Jesuit way?
Yeah, because you want to be the regular priest rather than some glorified king of your own.
Uh-huh.
And so, and he wears the most simple of chasubles. Obviously, he needs to have a chasuble. The pallium is special for the Pope and all archbishops. So his is special, but it's not as ornate as people might think.
During your time in Rome, given your position within the church, did you have an opportunity to see something or other things that people like me may never get a chance to see?
Yeah, but I'm going to say this, that probably with some effort, almost anyone can get special appointments and so on and so forth. For example, I mentioned to you the Scavi tours, SCAVI. Scavi tours are really, in my mind, one of the best tours of the Basilica that you can get because, first of all, it's to the point. It's only about an hour. You have excellent guides. And it's the area that we were talking about before where the excavation was taking place. That's why it's called Scavi tours, because Scavi means the excavations, basically. Mm-hmm. And so that you could go in and see exactly what the people in 1940 discovered and saw. And, it's really an interesting thing. And also you can see a lot of the tombs of the popes that have passed on recently. And so it's a nice little tour, worthwhile seeing. Actually, when you face the Basilica of St. Peter, you go through the gate on the left, and the Swiss Guard will let you in as you go to the Scavi tour.
Is that an area that, can you just sense the importance of that area as you go past the tombs of the various popes?
There's no question. There's a certain silent reverence.
Mm-hmm. So, as we continue along with our travel log, and we're running a little short on time now, your time spent in Rome, some of the happiest days of your life?
Yeah, I would say yes, because one of the things in my studies in Rome, we always had 6 weeks off at Christmas and 6 weeks off at Easter.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do is I got a job to work in a parish in Sicily.
Yeah.
So I was able to travel by train and going into Sicily. a place called Cristo Rey, which is a church right in an area called Capo d'Orlando, which is directly in the middle between Messina and Palermo. And so that is a beautiful, beautiful area, right on the water if you want. And you can even see Etna, and so on and so forth from there. But it was really a wonderful experience. The experience was great because you really were able to observe and interact with the people of faith in that particular area. And there was a tremendous innocence in the faith that they had. And it was really enriching for me to experience that as well. Their deep faith energized me. It was really great.
Oh, yeah. Final question for you. Do all seminarians, all ordained priests, need to, or do they have to, visit Rome at least once in their life?
No.
Really?
No.
You're kidding me.
I think it would be great if they did.
Yeah, I think that ought to be a mandate.
Well, in Detroit, we have special programs that allow for that. But there are other places, well, they don't. They just don't.
Yeah.
They don't study in Rome.
Well, I'm sure there are certain parts of the world where that would be almost impossible to provide. Yeah. But I was just wondering if that was...
No, Detroit, I think we're pretty fortunate in that the seminarians usually have a trip to Rome where they do a lot of hands-on exploration of the various works of the church in Rome.
By the way, if you own a travel agency and would like to put together the Father Joe Grimaldi tour of Rome, give us a call. It's 1-800...
Ask the priest.
Yeah, that was a joke, folks. That was a joke. I'm sorry, but that's typical of me to try and solicit something free. But that's what we did for years in radio. Boy, I sure am hungry. A pizza would taste mighty fine right now.
A little cafe and outside, right. And a visit to the Tre Scalini for a special gelato. But anyway,
here's how we do it. You're our tour guide, okay? You know how they have those cruises.
Yes, I should join that.
You know what I mean? The Father Joe cruise. I'm going to put that together. Any final thoughts on Rome? To Rome with love with Father Joe Grimaldi. Anything else?
I've been enriched by my experience. I really have.
And would you say that if you can, at least try to visit Rome at least once in your life?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
And I think even non-Catholics would benefit from that. And I'm sure they know that there are people there all the time.
Well, seeing as your parents are immigrants, you're an immigrant from Italy.
Correct.
It's your home.
It is.
So you got nothing bad to say about Italy.
No, and I felt this special affiliation with it. It was great.
I think we had a really fun time taking this little travelogue.
Well, I'm glad you liked it.
I think the slide machine unfortunately overheated, or we would have continued with more slides. But we want to thank you for joining us on the Father Joe podcast. I'm Ken Calvert, Father Joe Grimaldi.
See you soon.
How do you say it in Italian?
Ci vediamo.
That's it?
See you soon. Ci vediamo. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe podcast.
If you'd like, you can email us. It's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook. Simply search Father Joe Grimaldi. And thanks for listening, everyone.